Cover 3 Tailgate. And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Bud Elliott. That's Danny Kanell. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and everywhere you get your podcasts on demand. Thanks for hanging out. Smash that subscribe, smash that like, and come and join us in the chat, a.k.a. the Cover 3 Tailgate, where Garrett jumped in at 8:56 a.m. and he went full Ryan Day. I'd like to know where Matt Norlander is right now. The ongoing rivalry between Garrett and Matt Norlander was squashed last night in College Station as the Texas A&M Aggies broke the Norlander curse with a victory over the number 1 team in America. Congrats to Wade Taylor, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and all the Wade Taylors that we're going to have because the Aggies got the victory. So it's broken. Congrats to Garrett. Congrats to Texas A&M on being able to get it done last night. It was a busy night in college hoops.
Very much so.
I tweeted it last night. I think Garrett owes Norlander an apology. I don't think he should be coming at him. I don't. Does Texas A&M find it within themselves to upset Auburn without that losing streak, or was that the motivation that they
were asking?
Yeah.
Well, so it was interesting. It got a little bit college football expansion. Norlander went on I didn't have this planned, but Norlander did go on a little bit of a rant last night about the urgency that you felt last night. I mean, there were double bubble games that were going to double overtime. You know, there was like a lot that was flying all around. If you expand the tournament to 96, then maybe Georgia's win at South Carolina doesn't mean as much. You know, maybe that Ohio State-Nebraska game doesn't mean as much. It's kind of the echoes of what we talked about in college football. Is there anything from our college football the experience of year one with an expanded playoff that we could offer to that conversation?
I'll go anti-Kanell football take and say 64 was fine. Like, we are at a point where we don't need 76. We probably don't need 68, but we have to find a way to get 16 out of 16 in from a certain conference. My man Ken Pomeroy and I are best friends now. I don't know if you guys know that. Because we talk about it all the time on the radio, and I have heard it said a zillion times, like the SEC, what a year they're having, historical year, best conference we've ever seen. And I just sit there on my hands because I am not educated enough to make a really strong case that they are not and that they are potentially overrated. But basically, he pointed out, he said, hey, you know what? The SEC is really good, but they probably are overrated from the perspective that we're talking about 14 potential teams getting into the NCAA tournament. It's a little too skewed because of the non-conference success they had early in the season with a bunch of veteran teams, while everybody else, a little bit younger and experienced, getting a little bit better. But they did dominate the non-conference schedule, and they hold a lot of weight in that, so it's hard to argue against until the tournament comes, and we'll see if they back up all the bold proclamations they've been making all season long.
Well,
Is Oklahoma really on the bubble for the SEC tournament and on the bubble for the national? Okay.
Yep. Pomeroy also wrote that history suggests that conferences that are this highly rated during the regular season don't perform well in the tournament because the regression comes. So that'll be good for you, Danny.
Oh, I can't wait. I got drafts in the folder. I'm ready. I'm ready.
Without stepping on
the danger of being like, yeah, we're a basketball conference now. Like we need to see it, I think, at least once, right?
Who do you think gets
postseason?
What happens if the SEC fails in the tournament and we no longer have spring football for SEC fans to turn their attention to?
Baseball. They're good.
Yeah.
They are good in baseball.
I don't know. I saw a tweet last night. I thought they had a pretty horrible night on the baseball field.
Yeah. Gators got beat by UCF 13-3. Got run rolled. How we looking? Oh, that's right.
Oh, man. I haven't even gotten my baseball cleats on yet.
Shouts to Joe, who skipped Little League practice last night. I had to run the show. He's a big Gator fan. Had to go over there, watch the game, and that's a toughie.
Oh, that's what you get. All right, so my real quick, I'm not going to infringe on the Ion College basketball. They're going to have you covered all throughout the month of March. One of reasons why the NCAA tournament works, in my opinion, and one of the reasons why everybody fills out a bracket and everyone loves it, is I think it is the perfect amount of time. I think if you add one more weekend to it, then Steve down in accounting, who doesn't know anything, would check out. Like, I just think it's like that opening weekend, the second weekend, Final Four. I think that the amount of time that the NCAA tournament is the perfect amount of time for everybody who only watches college basketball for 1 month a year to tune in, love it, and then just check out again until then the next March comes around. If you try to add a little bit more onto it, I think that you're going to end up losing a little bit on some level of being able to get just the average, not even sports fan, just like the average American to jump in and get excited about March Madness.
And if they go to the 76, they're talking about just adding midweek, like early. They would just start early, like Monday, Tuesday, right?
Right.
Or whatever it would be. So they'd start earlier, and you don't lose that week on the calendar like you're talking about.
Right. The 76 is expanding the Dayton games, kind of.
Right.
You know, just sort of.
I think they should do it because it will lead to more meaningful games in the regular season.
There we go. And scene, stuck the landing. That's how we offer our college football experience. Okay, so on lots to get to today. We're going to go back with a second look. You know, we had our combine takeaways from a player perspective, but what does the breakdown of all the different players that we see tell us about what could be ahead in college football in 2025? We'll get to that in just a little bit. Maybe some of your questions as well, but about 10, 15 minutes before Monday's show, we started to get the reporting about what was the big news on Tuesday. That is the settlement of all of the litigation between the Atlantic Coast Conference, Florida State, and Clemson. They are dropping the lawsuits and agreeing to a new revenue distribution model and agreeing to new withdrawal penalty fees, which are much lessened and drop after 2030. We tried to, survey as best as we can, what was coming across our desk as we went live. Now with a little bit of time to digest it, some hard numbers that we actually have coming out of Florida State and Clemson as they had to, pitch this to their own university leaders to be able to get all of the I's dotted and T's crossed. I'll let billable hours start here, Bud. What did you find interesting as we learned more about this from the last time we chatted on Monday?
It was like an FSU and Clemson's like fantasy ended up being like right as far as how much they extracted from this. I was pretty shocked that they were able to get what they got in terms of the revenue concessions in the now and also the cost savings for the exit fee, which also now fully includes the grant of rights in the future. I mean, you're looking at somewhere between like $250,000,000 to $250 million to $500 million in savings in terms of rights fees. If you look at what the estimates were by Florida State and I think by Clemson as well, and I mean you'd have to do like the discount value of that, but still like it's probably pretty factual to say that they're saving $250 million with this deal, and the fact that the exit fee actually drops to 75. So if you're one of the high earners, you're going to be pulling over the next 6 years somewhere between 60 and 75 million, right? Or well, more actually, like 90, because 15 times 6, right? We should probably do some math here. So they're like, you got all the other schools to basically pay you, like, hey, FSU and Clemson, put it away, right? And then you'll be able to pay this reduced buyout in 2030, 75 million, although it'll probably happen earlier if I had to guess. At that point, you finance a little bit larger amount, and then you jump. Like that's pretty wild. And I think the why is interesting. Like clearly the ACC thought that they had a much better chance to win this than they did at one time. Otherwise, they would have acquiesced to basically the very basic asks of FSU and Clemson at Amelia Island, March of 2023, right? When they said, hey, we can't earn 17% of the conference's revenue and receive only 7%. Like that's not sustainable in the long term. We need to have more of like a meritocracy type approach here. They got a lot more than they asked for 2 years ago. What they didn't get was out of the conference right now, which may be a blessing in disguise if you're able to create a bidding war come 2030-ish.
I mean, there's no appetite to expand right now. We have not heard we have not heard any source reporting that the SEC or the Big Ten on any level is looking to expand beyond what they have anytime soon. So I don't know. Tom, you look like you're about to say something right there. I don't want to hijack this one.
I was just going to say essentially, and maybe I'm wrong, so correct me if I am, but the ACC bought itself time.
Yes.
It bought itself time to put together a contingency plan. It didn't want to be caught in the same spot that the Pac-12 was, where it just completely dissolved seemingly overnight, and then they were just left sitting there with Washington State and Oregon State like, what the hell are we going to do? So by doing this, it's greasing the skids further for Florida State and Clemson and maybe other schools to find new homes and leave in the next round when it does come and when it does happen. But it also gives them time for their remaining members to kind of plan for their future, and also for the league to plan for its future, to try to maybe send out some feelers to schools and other leagues to be like, all right, we're going to need some of these replacements lined up.
Completely. I think that's an undervalued aspect, because I was going through the whys and I was talking to different sources on this, and they're like, okay, on the ACC side, clearly there's not a lot of appetite for them to be deposed over the Swafford Raycom stuff, and over maybe like how the network for the ACC network came to be. Like that touched some nerves in Tobacco Road, and I don't think they ever wanted that stuff to get more public than FSU made it in the initial filings. I think there's like real appetite to not have that happen. But that only really extends to like the league office. Other schools in the league don't care about that as much, up until the extent of if they actually could prove like serious mismanagement, then FSU and Clemson walk scot-free, and then they care a whole hell of a lot. So there is some kind of shared interest in not having this thing, proceed, especially once the Florida Supreme Court ruled that it can continue in the state of Florida. Like, they were not going to get the home field advantage only of having it heard in North Carolina, at least not in the immediate time frame. So I thought that was interesting.
Hold on, real quick. Legally, all we got to was a venue fight. Like,
right.
We never.
I think they were scared of the summary judgment stuff coming up too.
Yeah, we never actually got to the point where anything was deposed. We never got to like the full exposure of documents. Like, Florida State was able to give us an insight into a lot of different things that we didn't even know about through this process, like the February 2025 opt-in clause, which then became a whole news item. But, like, we still never got to far enough down in the legal proceedings to say who had a leg up one way or the other. And so for the ACC, I mean, they just, whether it's one thing they did or didn't want to come to light, there's just the uncertainty of what are you going to get in Leon County, and what's going to happen if all of a sudden you do get a bad ruling based on a certain judge, and then all of a sudden you have lost literally hundreds of millions of dollars. Because guess what? Let's say 4 schools walk in 2030. That's $300 million for the rest of the schools that are still there to be able to divide amongst themselves and figure out how to move forward.
And the key word you said was still there. The schools will still be there in 2030. The people who run those schools may or may not be. And schools don't make these decisions. People do. So this is definitely a bit of kicking the can down the road from Jim Phillips, from the ACC presidents. Like, Phillips may not be the ACC commissioner in 5 years. He might be, sure. But like, these things turn over pretty frequently. So do university presidents. You don't usually have a university president who's there for 30 years. So if I'm an administrator running a school or a conference, I don't really want that on my hands. Like, hey, man, I made the call to be a hard no on this vote that ended up making my school become Washington State or Oregon State immediately, because we decided to go to the mat and fight this legal fight, and we lost. And now our value is basically equivalent to like a CUSA school. Basically it's replacement value, whatever. So I think there's some real like protectionism of the administrators here. Like, that's a real thing. I think FSU and Clemson were absolutely banking on that. Like, do you guys really have the balls to fight this thing out? Because there's a lot more for the ACC to lose than there is for FSU and Clemson if you did like take this thing full term and you lost. The ESPN bits here is interesting too, right? Because this thing was settled, it was never adjudicated on the merits. So we're not really able to say that the GOR was not ironclad or that it would not have held up. Although
please don't say the word ironclad. I'm banning the word ironclad.
I made sure
I'm sick of ironclad. No. You can be clad and you can have iron, and it is important to have in your. We are not. Nothing is ironclad. It's canceled. Ironclad. Cancel culture's back. Okay, ironclad is canceled.
I think like ESPN, and of course it's a settlement, so you won't really know, but like they clearly have an interest in this thing not going full term as well, because if it did, and Clemson won or FSU won or both, and they got out, a GOR not being enforceable the way it's written, I guarantee ESPN writes most of these the same way with its conference deals. That not being enforceable is a really big deal. The ACC's kind of small potatoes compared to another conference that they have a GOR with, right? So I'm not saying ESPN made them settle this, but ESPN's an interested party, and I think I'd be very interested if anybody thought that ESPN believed they should fight this, because I don't think there's like an actual argument, to the counter.
DK, yeah, what's your thought here?
Talked out of this, but I will say this because I do. So it sounds to me, percentage-wise, Florida State, Clemson in the ACC in 2030 or beyond is what, 5% or less?
I mean, yeah, like I've got another leg. I've got another branch to this conversation. I was going to wait for a little bit to go.
Start painting the Big Ten logo on the field now.
But what if it works out pretty well for them? What if they do pretty well, get access to the playoffs with an easier schedule, and they're collecting more money than everybody else? They're able to stay competitive on the big stage and compete with the teams in the SEC and Big Ten. Does it ever get to a point where it's attractive to stay?
Yes.
Yeah, like if they get 2 auto bids, you can financially, I think it could be feasible. But it's to me as a fan, it's not a real league anymore, because then it's really just Clemson, Miami, and Florida State every season, because they're all getting more money than everybody else competing for 2 spots. It's a 3-team league.
It's always been a 3-team league in terms of the revenue. Now they're just supporting those teams with the hope that they continue to be good, or in FSU's case, not go 2-10 and get back, to what they were the year before they went 2-10.
Yeah, but as a college football fan, nobody's tuning in rooting for teams to make more money. It's just win games.
Chip, you think there's a real chance?
Oh, I just think that, everyone's eyeing like they're going to be out the door. They're going to be out the door. Like you're going to go to the Big Ten. You're going to go to the SEC. And my other thought here is, what if you had spent or financed through private equity $100 million or $150 million to buy your way out, and then every conference ceases to exist in 32?
Right.
Now, what have you spent all this money on to buy yourself out? And you talk about kicking the can down the road, and all these administrators that might not want to like have something on their hands. Like, what if the Super League really is here? What if football entirely breaks apart from everything, and the only reasons conferences exist is to be able to organize your men's soccer schedule? I just think that there is a win here for Florida State and Clemson in that you're not just breaking out the door, trying to create a bidding war for the old reality when the new reality could be coming, and based on when a lot of these media rights deals are up, could be coming here around that 2030 time. So what you've done, if you're Florida State and Clemson, is you might just stay in the ACC, but now at least you have like very, very set terms. You have cost certainty of what it would cost to leave for a Super League, for a new conference that doesn't even exist yet, for the Big Ten, for the SEC, for whatever. And then, like, if you're the ACC, you understand that if there is a Super League, you're probably going to lose some of those. You're going to lose 5 or 6 schools anyway if there is a college football Super League, and you are going to have about 10 schools that probably were not going to either be picked or choose to engage with whatever that college football Super League is going to be.
I think the one factor that is going to become more important here is if the SEC goes to a 9-game schedule, I think you're going to have a lot of jealousy from FSU and Clemson fans and their administrators who are trying to sell tickets and get fans to travel to, relatively remote locations. Clemson's a little closer to major population centers than FSU is, but neither are super easy to get to. And you're trying to fill that stadium, and you look at it, and if you're an FSU fan, it's like, God dang, man, NC State is like our 3rd best home game of the year. And you look over what Florida's playing, if they go to a 9-game SEC schedule, that's not like, that's a hard thing to sell. You got to drive double the distance to Tallahassee as you do Gainesville from a lot of spots to see a lot of opponents that, like, as a diehard college ball fan, I like watching them, but I guarantee you most FSU and Clemson fans think a lot of this schedule is just shitty, right? And like that is going to become a major factor. Like TVs aren't getting smaller or cheaper. I was looking at a 98-inch the other day for $870. I was like, damn, like this is like the home experience is only getting better. Having good quality, like regular season games matters. And I think that's going to be a real driving force.
Here, the other piece of this, which I guess sort of ties into the Super League, Jim actually brought it up this morning. He said, what do y'all think would happen if the top schools in the SEC and Big Ten decide that they deserve more money than schools like Mississippi State and Purdue? Is this precedent setting? Because, it's not precedent. This is not precedent setting because we've had unequal revenue distribution.
Texas did it.
Yeah, we've had unequal revenue distribution before. And guess what happened? In both the times when the conference caved, the schools that they were caving to still ended up leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, will we see this? That's the question. Will the SEC and Big Ten hit a point where they entertain unequal revenue distribution based on your value to the media rights deal?
No. For two reasons. One, I think that they lack leverage in terms of where are you really going to go right now. Okay. Like, do I think FSU would have gotten a full share or Clemson a full share had they gotten out scot-free? No. I think they would have had to probably take a pretty bad deal, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, part of why they were engaging private equity. I do think the Big Ten would have actually taken them, but I think they would have put the screws to them as far as the terms of any kind of deal. I don't think a full share was on deck for them. But
I mean, it is funny that UCLA is getting a full share and Oregon is not.
Right. Exactly. I mean, leverage matters.
What if the NFL comes to Ohio State and says, we want you to replace the Cleveland Browns?
That's the thing, right?
The 33rd team.
Yeah.
But I could see.
That's North Carolina. Come on.
Yeah.
You could see leverage being gone, right? Mm-hmm. Or sorry, like you could see invites to whatever's next getting lost in the mail. I think that's probably how it happens. Like, I don't think all of a sudden you're going to see an SEC, where Vandy and Mississippi State take a 2% or 3% share.
I don't think that scenario is plausible in the immediate future, but I do think that maybe 20 years from now,
sure,
when the Big Ten and the SEC are the power two, and they're like, hey, wait a minute, what if we just merged our best teams and formed one giant super league? Then you could see that happening to where the schools like the Purdue's and the Mississippi States and the guys who aren't generating that same kind of income get left behind as a new league is formed.
If you're Petiti and you have a bunch of really, really, really competitive teams, but not anybody who can recruit well enough to compete in the playoff, do you look at one of these teams you think is going to become a free agent? Say, hey, like, we have great games week to week, but we don't have that team that anybody with the brain really believes can win in the playoff. Do you make some kind of rainmaker offer for one of them?
Are you talking about
Bud saying, do you
sorry, not Petiti, the Big 12 guy.
Yormark. I was about to say, Bud, yeah. Big Ten had two semifinals.
Not Petiti, excuse me. Why am I got Petiti on the brain.
Listen, Bud, do you not realize Illinois has a top 5 class right now?
That's true, they do.
I know.
You're talking about Big 12. Does Yormark look at it? I mean, if Yormark is the Big 12 is also up around that time, Yormark's probably going to be looking at a couple of years of the college football playoff of, not having those teams at the very, very top. I mean, heck, I was doing just like a sketch of how I imagine the tiers of the college football world for the 2025 season, just my very first one. And I just said Big 12 champ TBD. And I put them on the same level as Michigan and Miami. Like in my tier maker, I didn't actually use tier maker, but like, I was like, okay, so these 8 teams I'm going to put in the top tier. And then my next one, we've got like a Michigan, Miami, Big 12 champ TBD. And like whoever comes out on top, sure. Good job out there. Go get them, boss. Maybe you can, Arizona State showed you can come real daggum close to making some noise, but I don't think there's one program that you can confidently say in that conference right now is going to be like leading the charge in the college football world.
All right. Last thing that I have on this, and I wanted to say this and bring it up to you guys. So I think there's like different teams you got to vote with a carrot and different teams you got to vote with a stick, right? For some of them, I think the fear of becoming Washington State or Oregon State is pretty real, but some of them have enough juice to where like, that's not a real fear. Mm-hmm. And some of those are like basketball related schools. So they clearly had to make basketball a certain percentage of this, revenue pie, like the ratings revenue pie. Combining it with football wouldn't really make any sense because basketball is such a drop in the bucket compared to football, right? You could be the number 1 basketball rated team and still be behind like 7 or 8 football rating teams. So that doesn't make sense with how I think they would pay it out. So does that mean that they have a separate pool for basketball and football? And if so, if you're Duke, what is your incentive to put any money behind football? If you're Florida State and you're in a basketball coaching search, why would you spend any money on basketball knowing you can't really compete in this league with the amount that some of these teams are spending in NIL on hoops? Like, why would I not go throw it at a baseball program that's already running and just say, we're just going to punt basketball for the next 5 years? I'm curious as to how they structure this pot of money. Because I think to keep Duke and Carolina and maybe some of the other basketball schools that voted yes on this deal, to keep them happy, you probably have to keep the pool separate, right? I mean, if you know you can't compete in that, they're only going to pay out a couple spots. I mean, FSU could finish fifth in hoops and get nothing bonus-wise. Why am I throwing any money at hoops? We suck.
Well, see, and then you're jealous of Clemson, because guess what? Clemson just won the ACC championship, made it to the college football playoff, and they've got a team that's going to the NCAA tournament and is like, I don't know, they made it to the Sweet 16 last year. They could do it again. You know, like Clemson's actually the team that is going to check all these boxes right now, or the school that is going to check all these boxes.
But do you think they're going to check it on ratings?
Yeah, I mean,
for basketball?
I mean,
no.
ESPN just hyped Duke UNC like it was the Super Bowl. You know, like I bet you Clemson's basketball ratings suck compared to how good the team is.
That's true. I mean,
I don't know anything about this, but like I'm just guessing.
How long? We've seen coaches complain about time slots. We've seen fans complain about time slots. How long is it before you get a Brent Key or a Dave Doran or somebody complaining about a matchup versus two teams with better records, and meanwhile you could potentially have Florida State playing so-and-so that's worse, and they're like,
it was
hey,
this year, Danny.
Yeah.
There was grumbling about it this year. It was Pitt and who? They got stuck on it. Was it Pitt, Duke on ACC Network? They were both ranked.
Yes.
And ESPN's like, we don't care. People don't want to watch you.
Right. But if there is money at stake, you don't think they're going to get even louder about it?
Great call.
To be like, hey, wait a second.
They will.
We're getting screwed in a system that's supposed to reward performance. We're better teams. We have a higher ranking, and you're burying us on the ACC Network at noon when you're putting Florida State at 3:30 on ABC or Miami. There are going to be some complaints.
AC Network sucks so bad that people actually it's not on Nielsen. Like you get zero.
Right, they don't rank.
It's not like you get a bad rating. It's not even rated.
Yeah, it's rigged.
It's very rigged.
Yes.
You know what else is rigged? If Florida State and Miami and Clemson are playing more games against Notre Dame, do you think the football pot might be rigged?
Yeah. It's
rigged.
Rigged.
This is all just buying time.
Yeah.
Like the prognosis has been given. Let's figure out what we can do in the meantime.
And to that point,
if they're separate basketball and football.
Quantrell knows. Our friend says, Tom, who is more dead, the ACC or Cam Rising?
Cam Rising is dead. The ACC is dying.
Okay.
There's a difference.
All right. Coming up on the other side, NFL Draft Combine over the weekend. Saw a lot of players. We spent Monday looking at the players, but what about the schools they came from, and what does it tell us about what's coming up this fall? All that and more next.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more.
It's Gareth Bale! Ronaldo! Wonderful goal!
On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast. Tom, I apologize for putting you on the spot here, but everybody is sort of our friend Parker, Stats of War on Twitter. He got the conversation going and everybody continues to share it. A couple years ago, Greg Sankey was telling any reporter he was talking to that he was reading the book, The Club, which is about how the Premier League was established and formed. And that's led to a lot of the Super League conversation. And so, Tom, when I say I apologize for putting you on the spot, if you were to give sort of like the elevator explanation for what happened that led to the formation of the Premier League and why people continue to reference it. I mean, go read the book. I've heard it's a very good book, but like, why do people continue to point to that as something that we could see in college football?
Because it's what's happening in college football.
That's good. So what happened?
Well, English soccer has many different divisions, right? There's the Premier League, which is the league that is the Super League or whatever you want to call it. But then there's, the Championship. Then there's League One and League Two, and you go down and you down and down. They have promotion and relegation. You can work your way up. You can work your way down. They just created a league with the best clubs out of whatever to put them in, and they kept promotion. The same thing. It's just, it wasn't, they kind of just my understanding is they kind of just started over with the best teams. And then they had relegation, but they, brought some clubs up that didn't really earn promotion, formed it so that way they can get the huge TV deals that they wanted. And then they just went back to business. So it's not exactly the same because college football is not going to have promotion or relegation. I know it's fun to always write that they will and do those kind of hypotheticals, but that's not going to happen. But we have seen similar in college football in that the SEC and the Big Ten are kind of just plucking big brands to put into their league to increase their television money. So it's already kind of happened. Now, the other, I would say, reflection is what we're doing with the playoff. Because you'll remember in soccer, they had the whole Super League thing a couple of years ago. And then there was big revolt from fans in Europe, and they pushed back on it because the Champions League, which is technically a playoff where the best teams in each league, they get certain bids, certain teams qualify based on where you finish, and then you go play in this tournament. They wanted to create a league where the biggest teams, no matter how they performed, were in it every year. Barcelona's in it, Real Madrid, Liverpool, they're in it. You could finish in 19th place, but you would be in it. So the college football playoff is kind of taking a similar approach to that, where if the Big Ten gets 4 bids automatically and the SEC gets 4 bids automatically, how many times is Ohio State going to finish 5th in the Big Ten?
Oh, never.
Yeah, in a down year, they'll probably finish 4th. So they would still get into the college football playoff. That's kind of what we're getting to there as well. But here in the United States, we do not have that same kind of backlash to that kind of favoritism that they have in Europe for their sports leagues.
So there was, when they did the Super League, what was it, 12 teams that proposed? The one that got shut down because the reaction was so swift. People were like, we're boycotting. Do you think we would ever get that? Like, I get it. Like, and I think people were genuinely upset. Like, I feel awful for Washington State, Oregon State, but it's not going to make me boycott. But if you did start losing some teams that, are, or if it was a bigger group of teams like Mississippi State, like Vanderbilt, like NC State, and you started to have a growing number of teams, do you ever think we would get that? Like a pushback from the fans saying, no, hold on. Like, this isn't right.
The fans of the teams who are included? No. Like, I saw Oklahoma fans the other night telling Gerald McCoy that he was an idiot because he was saying, I don't like the idea of not having a spring game. And like, fans really believe whatever their teams want them to believe. It's pretty crazy. I think European soccer fans may be a little more independent of thought.
I would 100% agree with that.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. Give them a lot of credit. They got some lunatics too.
Oh yeah. But like they're lunatics that'll like go loony against their own owners,
right? And their own players on the field. They'll attack them.
I don't want to get political, but I think there's a lot of evidence lately in this country that people will just go along with what they're told to go along with.
Yeah. Follow the marching orders and the talking points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to your point earlier about Ohio State, forget finishing 5th in the Big Ten. Do you know how many times since 2002 Ohio State has finished outside of the top 10 nationally?
Once.
2004.
Yeah.
Oh, that horrible 8-4 team that Jim Tressel had.
What year did they go 6-6 under Fickle?
Oh, the Fickle year. Sorry. I'd thrown out outside of the interim coach year. But under Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer and Ryan Day, they have just, for the most part, finished inside the top 10. So, yeah, that's that might as well be a guaranteed spot right there. Okay. NFL draft combine was over the weekend. Started looking at this in terms of the schools that showed out. All the school accounts always want to brag about all the players that they have. So I'm going to run down some of the totals, the higher totals that we have. And speaking of Ohio State, I want to ask, how concerned should we be? And you can say very concerned, not concerned at all, about replacing all of this talent. So Ohio State had 15 players in the NFL draft combine. It included Will Howard, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Emeka Egbuka, Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke, and so much more. Jordan Hancock, Lathan Ransom, lot of star power there from that national championship team. How concerned are you about the Buckeyes replacing all that NFL draft talent in 2025?
Definitely
might finish in 4th.
Right. They might barely get in.
I would have a hard time thinking this team doesn't have a drop off, but also if you recruit extremely well and you're also still one of the biggest spenders in the sport and you retained a lot of elite talents, it's hard for me to who jumps them in the Big Ten.
I don't. Illinois.
I think it is a concern. I think it is fine to be concerned, but that is only in a myopic vacuum where the only thing that exists is Ohio State and its own standard of being Ohio State. I think the second you take those blinders off and compare them to everybody else and all the other teams at the national level and in the Big Ten that are also replacing pieces, I think you're probably less concerned.
But they won a national title, so yeah, there's probably going to be a drop off because they're probably not going to win the national title again. But I look at this from a situation where I've seen a lot of comparisons because of what happened at Michigan. Like Michigan loaded up, went all in, won a national title, and then completely collapsed last year. But there was so much more that went into that other than just the players leaving. Like Jim Harbaugh and the entire staff leaves. And I know Ohio State's lost its coordinators, but you've got Ryan Day and a bunch of that staff still returning, and they have recruited very, very well. And there's also, like, Julian Sayin might be better than Will Howard as a quarterback. We don't know yet. That's
after
not
that combine performance. I mean,
exactly. But it's not like there's a very small chance. There's a decent chance that Julian Sayin is a better quarterback than Will Howard. He's not as experienced. He's likely to make more mistakes than Will Howard made, but you've still got Jeremiah Smith. You've still got really talented rosters. So while they might not be as good, they're still going to be one of the better teams in the Big Ten. They're still going to be competing for the Big Ten title, and they're still going to be competing for a playoff berth, I think, at a minimum. I don't think it's quite the same situation as I've seen it compared to with Michigan.
Yeah.
Their best player on offense, Jeremiah Smith, is back. You could argue their best player on defense, Caleb Downs, is back. I totally agree with you. I thought Will Howard, he was underrated, probably didn't get enough credit for some of the play that he did have, but I do think they could get upgraded. And I think one of the reasons I think they're the top two, sometimes some books have them the favorite to win the national championship, is, by the way, while they're figuring all this out with this incredible inexperienced talent that's going to be playing, they can lose a game or two. Mm-hmm. And they're 10-2 and they're in. And shoot, if you're 10-2 and in, you might not even have to play in the Big Ten championship game. Get a bye week going in and a home game again. So like I think that's the most way I could make the most sense of it. And it's like, if they're not, like, what's the level of concern of who's going to pass them? Like you guys said.
Yeah, like if they lose that Texas game early in the year, they'll have more meaningful games to play later.
Right.
Yeah, they're probably going to finish higher in the conference than they did
this year. You want to talk about dedication? James said, "Does Danny have a studio in his automobile?" He stays ready.
Definitely.
Okay,
I do. I have a wrap. I have a wrap with the Cover 3 logos around, so I'm always advertising the show. I got all these buttons, full control room in here, pressing all the buttons. Got the monitors ready. We're good.
Then I heard,
they really
boom
listen
from the amplifiers.
They list saying at 6'1", 203. Really?
Do you think he's bigger?
No.
Okay.
He's skinny.
Speaking of the Texas Longhorns,
Senior Bowl had him at 225.
Yeah, that's right.
Ohio State and Texas at the top of a lot of the odds boards, top of the way too early list. Also at the top of the list of schools producing the most NFL draft combine invites. The Texas Longhorns had 14 players invited. We mentioned Jahdae Barron on Monday. We mentioned Matthew Golden, also Quinn Ewers, Kelvin Banks, a lot more to this group. How concerned are you about Texas replacing all this?
Relatively low. I think that they lost some really good college players, but like Bond had an underwhelming combine to a certain extent. And Barron is a really good college player. I guess I have some concern about the offensive line. There were some guys at the combine who said that Texas was really pushing the narrative, which is probably true, that Quinn Ewers was actually a lot more hurt than he was let on. And if you go back and watch the Michigan game after which he got hurt, that Michigan game, he actually played extremely well. And like, not just they scored well, but like he himself played well. So the drop off from the version of Quinn Ewers that Texas had in 2024 to the version of Arch Manning that they should have in 2025, and it's speculative because we don't really know what he's going to be, I think that drop off is going to be pretty small if there's anyone at all. In fact, I think Arch Manning will be better this year than Quinn Ewers was for the majority of 24. I don't know if Arch Manning is going to be better than how Quinn would have been had he stayed healthy the whole year. I don't know, but they did not go after anybody in the portal. Like, they knew it was Arch. So I do read into that. Much like Ohio State was not super serious about anybody behind the scenes, at least to my knowledge, in the portal. Unless Quinn wanted to come back, and I think there would have been interest there. Obviously.
Yeah, I have concerns about them at the tackle spot, but it's also mitigated by the fact that they've recruited the lines of scrimmage extremely well the last few years.
Goolsby looked okay when he got
Goolsby looked good when he got thrown in there. And then I just think that the offense they play is beneficial to their offensive linemen. Like, I know I've heard the stat about Calvin Banks. How many sacks did he allow in his career? Well, how many times was the quarterback holding the ball more than 1 second in that offense? And it's RPO kind of stuff. So it's just, I think that the style they play and the talent they have, they should be fine. My concern for Texas wouldn't be so much the talent that they lost and have to replace as much as it's the schedule they're going to face and the teams in their league.
But they do get gifted very similarly to what was last year. They don't have to play Ole Miss. They don't have to play LSU. They don't have to play Tennessee. They do play Florida. They do play Georgia again in Athens, but there's a little bit of leeway there. They get Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Texas A&M at home. And I know they're playing Ohio State, but they still do have 3 cupcakes on there as well right after that game. So they'll have a big test week 1. They'll figure out, all right, what are the problems we have? Arch Manning, if he plays great, it's awesome. If he doesn't, you kind of get him back up to confidence, his confidence up, work on the things you need to work on the next 3 games, and then you're kind of into the conference schedule.
You mentioned that, Bud, going back to what you said earlier about Florida State and Clemson and their home schedules and looking at the SEC. Here's Texas's home schedule. Tell me how excited you are to buy season tickets this year. San Jose State, UTEP, Sam Houston State, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and then the A&M game. Because remember, Oklahoma's at a neutral site. It's at the Cotton Bowl. So that is, wow. I can't wait to spend all that money to go see those teams.
Sponsored by Corona.
Who are the roadies? Georgia, Florida,
Ohio State, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Florida, and Georgia.
I mean, that's a pretty good road slate, but obviously you're right with the season tickets.
Yeah.
Texas could really benefit from 9 SEC games this year.
SEC was a little bit lazy with their scheduling when they just decided to flip everything from 2024 to 2025. We'll worry about the rest later. Is it just switch sides? You two switch sides. Okay. The Georgia Bulldogs also had 14 players invited to the NFL Draft Combine. That group includes Trevor Etienne, Michael Williams. We did talk about Malachi Starks. We talked about Tate Ratledge, Jalen Walker also headlining that group. How concerned are you about Georgia replacing its NFL draft talent?
They're used to it. I mean, if anybody is used to it, it's Georgia. I mean, they're rattling off double-digit draft picks, every year for what, 3 or 4 years now at minimum.
I don't know that they're developing and recruiting offensive linemen at quite the unbelievably unsustainable clip they were, maybe a half decade ago. So that's a bit of a concern, but they also had a lot of injuries this year. So I think if you just kind of have some positive regression on the offensive line injury front, you're probably going to be better up there next year. Receiver, given the fact they had to dismiss 2 kids post portal closing, one was dismissed, one was just kind of permanently off. They're going to be better there, I think. I mean, you lose Dom Lovett and a guy in Arian Smith who we were this is a gadget guy who they're having to put into the starting lineup because of some of the injury stuff and some of the behavior and dismissal stuff. So I think they'll be better.
Yeah, last year's Georgia team was so inconsistent, and it's weird. It's what we'll find out in 2025 was 2024 just like an off year, or was it the start of something?
Because they only lost by 1 score to Alabama in the 2023 season. And for a lot of the rest of the year, they looked awesome. So we'll see if what last year was. The Oregon Ducks, 13 players. Dylan Gabriel, we talked about. Tez Johnson, we talked about. Also Derek Harmon, Josh Connolly, a lot more. Oregon replacing 13 players who are off to the NFL Draft Combine and part of the NFL draft process. How are we feeling about the Ducks replacing that talent?
I have more concern about them than I do Ohio State.
And Ohio State and Georgia and Texas have been at this for just a little bit, a few more cycles. And Dane Lanning's doing it right.
He is. And it's when you look at what they've done, like they are recruiting very well, but they've also had the cycle where they've had consistently veteran quarterback play. As of right now, they won't have that going into next season. Then you combine it with the talent that they lost, there won't be a lot of veterans at other key spots on the field for them to rely on. So I do think I don't think they're going to be bad by any stretch of the imagination, but undefeated regular season, winning the Big Ten again, I don't think that's in the cards.
Oregon fans are real convinced Dante Moore is like a dude, and he might be.
He might be.
I think it's certainly possible that they definitely like him. If not, like Austin Novosad, maybe could play at a decent level. Maybe Moore is better than Gabriel. We don't really know. It's possible. I mean, you lose.
He's more gifted.
Tez. Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about receiver in some ways. Like some of the guys who they've signed, and like are they just ever going to get? It's not really their fault. Like they just have not been able to get healthy. But I mean, Holden was the number 3 for them last year, and he's gone. You lose a tight end in Ferguson, who like a lot of people really loved, and you lose Herbert as well, who played a whole bunch. I like Kenyon Sadiq quite a bit at tight end. Like the guy they threw 2 or 3 touchdowns to in the Big Ten championship game. You got to return, or you got to replace a lot of offensive line, a whole lot. Defensively, you lose both those D tackles. You win. Like that was a hit last year. They paid a ton of money for those guys, and it was well worth it. Replacing those dudes isn't easy. I don't know they're totally turnkey, especially because I think this year's portal was rough, and they also lost their top. I think their top 6 DBs by snap count.
5 I think it's 5, but it might be 6.
Because they were old, right? I mean,
that's what I'm saying. This was a veteran team.
Yeah.
And now you're not going to be the veteran team. So, and then also let's look at last year's schedule. Like this was their road slate was Oregon State, UCLA, Purdue, Michigan, which we know was not your typical Michigan, and then Wisconsin at the end of the season. And that team was just a dead team walking by that point. This year, they've got to go. It's not a monster, but they've got to go on the road to play Penn State this year. They've got to go on the road to finish the season at Washington. Iowa could be better. Rutgers is not going to be an easy trip for them. So it's just, they're still probably going to be a top 4 team in the league. They're still likely to be competing for a playoff spot all year, but I just don't think that they could. I don't think it's realistic to think they'll be as good as they were last year.
Like no Ohio State, no Michigan. You do get Minnesota at home, you get USC at home. I think the trip to Washington for the Apple Cup is still, or not the Apple Cup, the Civil War is kind of difficult. But you get Oregon State, you get Northwestern, as you mentioned. I don't know. Like, if you're Oregon, you should not be having any trouble with Rutgers now. I get your point. I think that's a tough cross-country road trip, but I think if you're an Oregon fan, you're like, with what we're donating and what we're spending, like we should not be having any trouble with Rutgers.
True. Coming up on the other side, we have just given you a couple of schools that were all in the college football playoff and had double-digit players invited to the NFL Draft Combine. What about some teams that came just close and now also have to replace double-digit players? All that and more.
Next.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, the Ole Miss Rebels had 11 players, tied for 4th among all schools in the entire country in terms of players invited to the NFL Draft Combine. Jackson Dart, who we have talked about a lot in the quarterback battle, but also, your Walter Nolans, also Trey Harris, and so much more. What's our level of concern? Danny, what's our level of concern with Ole Miss replacing all this talent?
This is the Portal King, right? I mean, aren't they up there again in the transfer portal rankings where you are kind of used to a lot of this turnover? I do think similar to Oregon, a little concerned about the quarterback. I mean, because there is some uncertainty there. You've had really good, solid play from Jackson Dart. There's not an Arch Manning waiting in the wings. So that's probably the biggest concern for me. But I do think Lane Kiffin has thrived in this era of, roster turnover, getting players up to speed quickly in a system that is very friendly. So, but I think the bigger question is, like, it did feel like last year was the window to get there, and they still came up short. So if you're asking me, like, projecting, I would say they're probably not a playoff team next year based on that. If they couldn't get it done the way things were, the stars were aligned last year, I'd be surprised if they made it this year.
Yep. My level of concern is always going to be higher for a team that's built the way Ole Miss has played or built. Like any kind of portal heavy team, I'm always going to be higher concerned about the replacements because it's just so hit or miss for a lot of these things. And I do have questions about what this Rebels team will look like. But the one thing that works in their favor, again, is the same thing as you mentioned, Chip. They just kind of flip-flop schedules on everybody. So Ole Miss had a favorable schedule last year, and guess what? They've got a pretty favorable schedule again this year. Like their road slate starts with, they're at Kentucky. They would never lose at Kentucky. At home, maybe, but never on the road. You get Georgia and Oklahoma on the road and Mississippi State, but their home slate is Georgia State, Arkansas, Tulane, LSU, Wazoo, South Carolina, Citadel, Florida, maybe. So, like, I still think they're going to be in that 8-4, 9-3 range.
I tend to agree, and I like Austin Simmons, but when I look at some of these computer stuff, there is a bit of a way you can game it, not huge, but I think Ole Miss games it a little bit in some of these advanced metrics, and that is because they do try to run it up a ton on the bad teams. They still go fast. They still try to chuck it deep on these bad teams, and I think the computer systems early on in the season, that their definition of garbage time is a little bit too broad for my taste when it comes to capturing the true power of some of these teams who want to run it up on people like crazy. I mean, they beat Furman 75-0. They beat Middle Tennessee 52-3 and are throwing late, right? They beat Wake 40-6. They beat Georgia Southern 52-13, and they lose to Kentucky, a team that has at least some athletes who are going to go to the combine, right? They beat South Carolina when Carolina didn't have Sellers. Isn't that an Ashford game, I think, 27-3? Then they lose at LSU. They play like crap against Oklahoma and win 26-14. They did crush Arkansas at Arkansas. I mean, I don't recall the circumstance of that game. Was that the one that the Arkansas quarterback missed?
I don't remember.
Remember, he got hurt.
Banged up.
He was banged up, and it was just it was not a white flag game, but we weren't walking away with strong takes one way or the other. It was not a competitive ball game.
And then they crushed Georgia, to their credit. I mean, it was a weird weather game, but like they absolutely they handled business really well there. They go and they lay an absolute egg off a bye, by the way, at Florida in the Swamp. They beat Mississippi State in a game that wasn't super impressive, and they run it up on Duke, and Duke didn't have a quarterback. So I don't know. Like I don't think the drop off has to be quite as big as maybe it might be projected to be, but I'm also not sure this team was all that good last year. I think they had some good players, but I think they just beat a lot of really bad teams by a ton. And there's some signal in that, but I think you can kind of overfit to that signal. And I think Ole Miss is the prime candidate there.
Well, also Danny, you mentioned the Portal King did it again. He's got 22 transfer portal players, and 24/7 Sports has him as a top 5 transfer portal class. But man, you start to dig in, and we get to our conversation about what the level of talent was in the transfer portal. It's all relative, and it's like, congrats, you've got a top 5 transfer portal class, but Harrison Wallace from Penn State is one of your most highly rated transfer portal additions. You lose a lot off of the defensive line, and like, look, you got Prince Will Umanmielen, like that's good. Like he was at Nebraska last year. He's a talented player, but I think replacing everything that you had in terms of the interior defensive line, the bodies that you had, the experience that you had, I don't think this is going to be a group that leads the nation in sacks like it did this past season. I think I am concerned about Ole Miss replacing all of the talent that they lost off this team.
I mean, to your point, let's take the number 5 class from last year and tell me you wouldn't rather have that class than the number 1 class this year. So Texas pulls Makuba, Trey Moore, Matthew Golden, Silas Bolden, Blackshear, Isaiah Bond, Amari Nyblack, 2 defensive linemen in Norton and Jermaine Lowell who actually contribute on a team that made the Final Four. Like, yeah, I don't think that the portal talent this year was nearly as good overall.
Yeah, there's no Walter Nolan in their transfer class this year.
Yeah, that's 100%.
I think they're good at scouting. Like I think Ole Miss does do a good job of kind of like picking up rocks and seeing what's under there. But it ain't nothing under, ain't nothing under there. It's just, it kind of is what it is.
The South Carolina Gamecocks had 11 players invited to the NFL Draft Combine. We talked about Nick Emanwari as one of the superstars of the entire NFL Draft Combine. So that was something that stood out. But you go into it and you see that this is like the whole South Carolina defense. I mean, 8 of the 11 players that were selected. Be safe out there, Danny. 8 of the 11 players that were selected.
The background is suddenly moving.
8 of the 11 players that were invited, not selected, but invited to the NFL Draft Combine were from the defensive side of the ball. Lenore Sellers can't play defense.
No, he cannot. That's a good observation.
Thanks. I'm a professional.
They lost like grown ass men off that team who were old. I mean, Kyle Kennard played his butt off for them. 10 sacks, 23 hurries, 18 stops. Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders combined for 38 stops. Like that. I mean, DeAndre Jules played a role for them this year. He's gone too. It just feels like they lost a ton on the front. They had a bunch of like really good college linebackers. I don't know if those guys are going to be studs in the NFL, but not super easy to replace. I know a couple teams I spoke with thought that the linebackers available in the portal this year were absolute dog shit. It's like, man, if you need a backer this year in the portal, you're in real trouble. And they have to replace 3 of them. I mean, Knight, Williams, and Bam. That's a lot to replace, man. And like, I think the secondary could maybe improve with some of the young guys growing up, but losing him and worry, that's a big deal too. I totally buy that the edge rusher Dylan Stewart and obviously Sellers could take a big step forward. I mean, Tom and I watched that bowl game. I was there in person. I mean, Illinois had him. His head was spinning. He was having real trouble reading coverages, and he's very, very athletic, but I don't think he actually does a great job of avoiding sacks relative to pressure, and that's something that's got to improve. Like he can make people miss, but also I think he runs himself into some sacks at times. And I think he's he could get so much better, but also, man, like this team ran good in some of these games really well. Like they were number 1 in the nation in 4th down defense. That's not something that's super crazy repeatable overall. They were really good in the red zone. I'm like, man, the Sellers and Dylan Stewart could get better.
Sure.
Significantly so. And this team could be nowhere near as good as it was last year.
And like another thing that works against them too, like we talked about it with Ole Miss and Texas, how their schedules are easy. Well, guess what, man? South Carolina's schedule was hard as hell last year. And guess what? It's hard as hell again this year. Like the start of it, not terrible because you're starting with Virginia Tech, South Carolina State, Vandy, Mizzou, Kentucky. Mizzou's the only one of those on the road. But then the back half of the schedule is LSU on the road, Oklahoma, Alabama, at Ole Miss, at A&M, Coastal thrown in as I guess your FCS bye this season. And then you finish with Clemson. So like it's hard to imagine that team's going to win 9 games again.
Totally. Almost everybody who they play, I think, will project to have better quarterback play as well. I mean, Vandy has like 30-year-old Pavia.
Is that including Nuss just being better, I guess?
Sure. Now, they do dodge. They don't have to play Lagway, and they don't have to play Arch Manning.
Right.
And that helps. And I don't think Kentucky's primed for a bounce back at all. So, like that, the opening of this schedule is pretty friendly. If South Carolina is as good as their fans think it's going to be, they better start 5-0. Like, you better go win in Blacksburg. You better, like, Vandy better not be real competitive. At Missouri, like, if you think this is a legitimate playoff team, you need to win that ballgame at Missouri. Because the back half is not real easy.
Can't do the T thing anymore.
I mean,
that's right.
That's right.
They go to LSU, host Oklahoma, host Bama, at Ole Miss, at A&M, get Coastal, which is nice, and then you host Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get to this last one on here, driving bets.
We probably need to make a rule that, like, I don't really. If Danny's doing that, he needs to be driving the Tesla because it means the Tesla's driving him.
I don't think, like, unless Danny's driving down a bumpy road, I don't know if driving bets has the same appeal as like maybe walking bets would.
All right, the Miami Hurricanes.
Wait, hold on a second. What about pass catchers for South Carolina? Like Josh Simon went to the combine.
Yeah,
he was their go-to guy. Like they forced him the ball and he made it pay off. I don't like is Nick Harbor going to be something finally?
So here's my
fantasy team hopes so.
my thought with South Carolina and with a few other places where I'm looking at like the supposed absence of receptions or targets. I do think that when you have a player who's going to command so much attention from the back half of the defense, that you are going to be able to take a Jag or a Jag plus and be able to give them not first team all conference level production, but like, I don't know, second, third team all conference level production, SEC wide receiver of the week, October 15th, kind of games. So because you are not going to be asking the same kind of contested catch, one-on-one play type of stuff, because you're just not going to see it as much with the player of Sellers' gifted ability. I think South Carolina could be okay there.
Makes sense. They also didn't take anybody in the portal at receiver. So if you want to read into action or inaction as signal, maybe that means that internally they like some of these young guys at receiver. Yeah. Like I don't think their receivers really scared anybody last year. It was Simon was the guy.
Speaking of force feed, what are we going to do without Xavier Restrepo? Oh God, that guy for years, for multiple quarterbacks, for multiple coaches. Wait, maybe multiple. Wasn't he a freshman the last year of Manny?
Yeah.
I thought he was a 4-year player. I could be wrong about that. But Xavier Restrepo's target share has allowed him to become the most productive wide receiver in Miami football history. So
call him the best.
The best, sure.
There you go.
Miami had 10 players invited to the NFL Draft Combine. That included Xavier Restrepo, but also Cam Ward and many more. What is your concern level? Obviously, we know what we're doing with the quarterback position with Carson Beck stepping in. But what about the rest of that group and Miami's talent coming back? How much concern there?
A lot of concern over leadership on offense.
Is that because of the Cam Ward, like what he meant for the culture?
That's just from I was, Orlando, Bradenton, Tampa, Miami, a couple other stops over the last week on the recruiting circuit. That's what came up a couple times. It's just like talking to people who I trust. The leadership is the concern. Like losing Cam, losing Restrepo, losing some guys who had been there a while who cared. And I don't think that's a shot at Carson Beck, but maybe it is. I don't know.
I think that's maybe, okay. But I think it's a compliment to Cam Ward.
Agreed.
I mean, that was the story going into the fall where it's like, and I always I shouldn't always roll my eyes, but like I sometimes roll my eyes when somebody feeds me. It's like, and this quarterback, man, Chip, he's got the wide receivers getting together and they're just doing drills themselves. I mean, they're so motivated right now. But that sort of thing was like the big like Cam Ward narrative, and the Cam Ward story was like how all in he got everybody else on that offense, that as soon as he got to Miami, he was the biggest voice and he was driving people and inspiring people. And like, that was something that sure is going to be missed.
Defensively, they should be better.
Yes.
It'd be hard not to.
Hard to be.
Yeah, philosophy-wise, they should be better. I don't even know if it's an upgraded talent as much as it's just going to be, hey, let's use common sense on the defensive side of the ball. I have concerns about them, but they're alleviated by the conference that they play in. I do think they're going to be the best team on the field most weeks. Like, they have to play Notre Dame. Won't be easy. Florida won't be easy. We'll see at Florida State. But for the most part, you look at that schedule, and it's like, I'm not saying they won't have tough games, but by and large, still feel like they're better than the teams they're playing.
I think that's fair.
But also, like, we don't know what Carson Beck looks like.
We at least saw clips of him out there doing like the rotations.
Mm-hmm.
Dak Prescott?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Thrusting them hips out there.
It's like there's typically there's positive results from this surgery on quarterbacks. It does not have the same kind of impact on them that it has on a pitcher. But you never know. Like, that's the thing. Like, will he be tentative throwing it because he's afraid to just really let it go?
Opening weekend, Notre Dame, Miami. Who you got?
Notre Dame.
Yeah, I agree.
Doesn't even matter who's playing quarterback.
I mean, look, that is probably the best offensive line matchup of the entire season.
Mm-hmm.
Like like the Miami offensive line.
Like, who has a better offensive line than Notre Dame? Maybe Miami.
I'm not.
Who has a better offensive line than Miami? Maybe Notre Dame.
Notre Dame.
Anybody else in conversation here? I'm sure we'll have Aaron Taylor on to talk. I mean, there's a couple we're probably missing, but Miami and Notre Dame are going to be way up there as far as the preseason, best offensive line stuff.
I think Illinois is up there, and that's not just me being a homer. It's just that it was very good last year, and the whole unit's back next year.
They blocked the hell out of a really good South Carolina line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, you're watching the combine, it's like Illinois handled him fine. So they are good, and it's not a surprise that Bielema has them right.
Yeah,
it's not a surprise Mario has Miami's offensive line right.
Yep, good point.
I think I think Ohio State's will be okay. I think Texas's will be good. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It's like, I don't know but I think right now, based on what we know, Notre Dame and Miami are the two best in the country.
I'm interested to see Alabama.
Yeah.
I'm always interested to see Georgia with how they pull in guys. I'm interested to see Penn State because they made a real effort to improve that room through high school recruiting a couple of years ago. So those guys should be rounding into form, maybe.
What's LSU going to look like without the tackles?
I think a downgrade.
Yeah,
maybe not a massive one. Like, they spent a lot to make sure it's not a huge downgrade, but can't tell me it's better.
Yeah, Will Campbell's really freaking good.
Yeah, forget your arm length. That boy's good tackle. Texas A&M, maybe?
Potential.
Yeah, who did they lose? Because that's actually a really good pull. I thought they were super thin last year, but the starters they were excited about, and the ones who stayed healthy played well.
And the skill positions fell apart for them. Everybody got banged up. Like, it was easy.
Florida's a good pull, by the way.
Florida
by the chat. Yeah, I think they'll be pretty good.
They've upgraded at left tackle. That's for sure. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to throw kids under the bus.
Later in the season, it was easy to sort of put Texas A&M's offense in a box because they had sort of been withered away at all of the pieces that brought a lot of dynamism to it. Made them like really explosive, but full health. I could see that offensive line being a group we look at.
So they do lose Trey Zune, right? Didn't he go pro?
Yeah.
A&M.
That's the Zune, Zuhn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Is Wisconsin finally going to get back to that level?
I don't know.
Okay.
If they do, I don't think it'll be this year.
Oh, I think Auburn's going to be good, pretty much better up front. They spent big money to take
Zune stayed.
Tex tackle. Oh,
Zune
he pulled back out.
Yep.
Okay, that's interesting.
Will be interesting to keep an eye on. All right, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. It's our time to talk with you. We already got questions from the big old bag of mail that include what the future of non-conference scheduling might look like, a missed recruiting story specifically for Tom, and I'll go ahead and just give you all the launch for this one, and then maybe we can also have someone bring it. If you were going to a party, and at the party it was like not college football diehards, but like reasonably educated college football fans, and you only wanted to stir the pot, you only wanted to like get the people going, what would be a take or a topic that you would bring to that party to be able to get this? So let's say dinner party with like 15 college football fans. What's the take or topic that you think you could just throw in and it would just get everybody going? So think about it. That'll be on the list of questions from the big old bag of mail tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Those of you who come early, they pull into the parking lot at the tailgate. You drop a question. We love getting to those questions right off the top. Early birds. You always have a spotlight with us on Thursdays. And you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fornelli. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow me at Chip _Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.